Okay, welcome to our first Unscripted Friday 5, where we're going to go ahead and just chat about this most recent video that we did, is dyslexia a gift? Yay!
Yeah, this was a big one, wasn't it?
It
Yeah, it's
was
the
because
first
it's very
time.
personal too.
Yeah, and it's the first time we've ever recorded everything first take.
Yay!
We're getting better, you guys.
Yeah.
So personally, this impacts, obviously dyslexia is something that we do, right? It's our career, our profession, but each one of us has a direct relation and a direct personal experience with dyslexia. Um, how does that change?
Right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I know for me personally, it's made it a mission. Like, how do I get to parents early enough? How do I convince mama bears of 6-year-olds, please, please,
Yeah.
right? Let's get started early. We can prevent this. What do you ladies find about?
Well, I just want to say thank you, Mindy, for sharing your personal story, and Jen, you as well. I think that it's very vulnerable and powerful for you two to share. I too have personal stories, and I'm like, I'm going to go with the research. I'm going to take the research part. Thank you. So I just wanted to say thank you. That was very well done. I know that's hard to do. I'll let Jen answer your question, Mindy.
Well, I feel the same as you, Mindy. It was personal for me because as a first year teacher, I didn't know how to help my own son. I hadn't learned anything really in depth enough about dyslexia in my training to be aware of the signs and to know specifically how to help them. Fortunately, here where I am in Texas, we have dyslexia therapy in the school system. So I was able to hook into our campus dyslexia therapist, and that started me on my journey and my journey to help him. But it turns it into more of a mission and a ministry, and a personal narrative is always helpful for other families as well. When they can hear the story of my son and how he is now successful, and he had to work hard, but he overcame and, was able to build his capacity in those areas while also just totally living into his strengths. It's encouraging. And I think that's a real important aspect of what we do as well. We're not just there to teach literacy skills. We're there to teach the whole child and to support the whole family.
That's right.
Yeah. And I think most therapists feel very passionate about what we do. I don't think anyone goes into the field of education without a passion for learning, for teaching. And for me, I think I've seen both sides of the coin about the devastation that can happen when someone doesn't get the help that they need, and the beauty of when someone does. And my family has been riddled with a long history of learning disabilities. And you know my mom, my uncle, when they were growing up, in the 70s, they didn't get this kind of help, right? Very creative, very intelligent, very smart people were stuck in a basement with no help. Weren't taught how to read, they weren't taught how to write. It was just, if you can't keep up, you can't keep up. And the consequences of that is devastating. It impacts their self-esteem, it impacts their communication, their belief in themselves. And it can really, it can change someone's life when you give them
100%.
power to know the difference, and to know that when you struggle in literacy, when you struggle to read, write, and spell, it doesn't have to do with how smart you are. You can be really smart, highly intelligent, very successful, and still struggle in this area. We just need to work at this, right? It develops that resiliency at a young age. And if you don't get that, prior to 10, like that's a hard thing to overcome. So
That's so true too, Lindsay. It's that mindset of, well, if I can't do something this basic, I must be dumb, right? And if you don't, if families or around this child who struggles to read doesn't have those supports, it can go one way or it can go another.
Exactly.
Yeah. How confusing for a little kid to be in the classroom and to be sitting next to Joe, who's able to read fluently and write well. And yet, you have Sally, who is really smart and can figure things out and is able to have conversations with her peers and is witty. And yet Joe over here is crushing it. And she's like, why can't I do the same thing? It's so confusing to children. And so it's so important to
It
capture
is.
them at that young age to say, hey, that's okay, right? I'm going to
Yeah.
help you. I'm going to teach you. And this is how we're going to do it. Yeah.
And I think, to that point, it is, we cannot underestimate the social and emotional impact for our
100.
students, even within the family unit. Like in my experience with my son, I have an older daughter, and she was completely opposite. She was just spontaneously
Like
reading
my
in
sister.
threes.
Yeah, opposite.
Books were her thing. And my husband and I were like, yeah, great, this is how it goes. And then my son came along and we're like, okay, what is it? Why is he not able to do what she is able to do? And, it was just a lack of education on our part. And it is sometimes easy without knowledge to fall into, he just needs to work harder. He just needs to, be more mature. And we hear that a lot from parents. And I think that's a natural response, but it's important to get that awareness out there that this is a difference, it's a spectrum, and it is a neurodiverse issue of just the way the brain is functioning. And as you spoke to in your example, Mindy, we need to support that, but also realize that these kids have strengths and they have just very, very strong skills in other areas that we need to be supporting. And I think that
and I think it's important to say some do. Not all dyslexics are gifted, right? Or have these incredible strengths, because that also can put undue pressure on them, right? Can you imagine being compared to Einstein? Like, whoa.
But I don't think that's what we're saying. What we're saying is that every child has interests. They have passions. They have strengths.
I will
I'm
tell
not
you,
Einstein, but I think what we need to recognize is that everybody is on a spectrum of strengths and weaknesses, and everybody has passions, and everybody has things that they are that they can be cultivated. And so if literacy is a block or an issue, we need to remove barriers in those areas where they have interests and strengths, while providing them the supports and scaffolds that they need.
That's right. Absolutely. One thing I will say is grit. Every dyslexic child I know, every struggling reader, writer, speller I know, they've got more grit, because you can't outrun, and you can't not learn how to read. You can't not learn how to write. So that is one characteristic that I will pretty much say it goes across the board, because any child who is out there trying, by golly, they get up every day and they try. So we need to embrace that. And I think exactly like what Jen and Lindsay were saying, focus on that.
Yeah, that resiliency,
And I will say that,
I get by.
Saw that for sure in my son. He again, I have a daughter, and things came very easy to her academically, and he had to very much work and struggle. Ultimately, in the end, he learned a lot of great skills that she didn't necessarily have, and she had to pick up later, because he learned the value of working
hard.
Progress over perfection, and having to really, I have a goal, I'm gonna have to really work hard. And as he got older, he chose to go to extra tutoring and extra classes in order to get into the college he wanted and all of that. And so it is that grit, which is a huge, I do think that is a gift per se that we can say.
Yeah, and equally important to do both, right? Work on that deficit piece, give them the power to remediate that. And also, what are the strengths? What can we empower them to continue to develop as well? Equally important to work on both. One thing I wanted to talk about that kept coming up was, that there's not a lot of empirical studies that definitively answer this question. Sorry, my dog is out here now that our time is up. Unscripted, welcome to Unscripted. But I think that can't stop us from, at all continuing to honor also the anecdotal information that we know. So yes, while there's not a lot of studies that show that, this is a definitive thing, that they have these gifts in visual spatial reasoning or increased, sensitivity to stimuli, anecdotally, how many students have we worked with that we look at their neuropsych reports and their visual spatial scores are off the charts?
Yeah.
I look at their neuropsychs and I see these scores that put them consistently in the gifted range over and over again. And it's how many kids do we talk to that love Legos, that they're passionate about building,
Exactly.
or paint, or dance,
yes,
Yeah.
sports,
like these gifts that they have, these things that they can build and create. And so while we don't have as many neuroimaging studies as we'd like, as many empirical studies as we'd like, I think it would be a mistake to not, in our field, continue forward with this anecdotal information and these stories that we have from our students and from our families, because we have consensus in reading. We have a science of reading. We've got over 30 years of research that says a lot of this is what works. We still have a lot of questions too. But think back to the day in the early 1900s with Anna Gillingham and Dr. Orton. They didn't have that, and we still use so much of the methodology and principles today. So it's, I think, a mistake to just discount. It's just such a cool question. I can't wait to see
And
what we learn.
I think that's one of the most encouraging things coming out in the field right now is a focus away from the deficit model, where all the research for dyslexia is focused only on, what's glitching in that reading network. How are we going to fix that? How are we going to solve that per se? And more taking this neurodiverse approach of, we're on a spectrum. Everybody's on a spectrum. Dyslexia is just part of that spectrum of learners. And on that side of the spectrum, there are specific supports and intensive training that's needed. But at the same time, we do have strengths over there as well that need to be nurtured. And there is more research coming out on the strengths. In fact, there was an article just yesterday that was posted looking at some of those visual spatial strengths. They've done another big study on it. So I think we will see more and more studies on the actual strengths of how this different wiring or neurology is, and continue to see a movement away from this deficit mindset and more into seeing it as this neurodiverse approach. So that is encouraging.
Very exciting.
Cool. Very exciting.
Yeah, that's so cool. I mean, we work with the coolest kids.
So
they are the coolest.
So cool.
Empirically speaking.
Yeah, well, mama's heart speaking too, I would have to say.
Yeah. All right, ladies, shall we end our first unscripted and go debate whether we post this or not?
Yeah.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and stop this recording, and I will be back in our meeting in a moment.
All righty.